statements which have not been well received by the demonstrators at all. No, they're looking to remove President Mubarak, but they want to see a complete break with the past. They don't want Mubarak to be replaced by a kind of Mubarak clone, and certainly not son of Mubarak. I mean, that's more or less ruled out now. They want Mubarak himself gone. And then they want to see reforms, a root and branch change to the system, so that never again will Egypt find itself in a position where the same man can remain in power for decades after decades. So Omar Suleiman would not be seen as that kind of change figure. He would be seen really as more of the same.
Jackie Rowland joining us from Cairo. Thanks very much. And as we've been saying, the leadership of Egypt's ruling National Democratic Party, the NDP, has reportedly resigned. So who's taking over the top NDP positions now? Egyptian state television is saying the new Secretary General will be Hossam Badrawi. He is described as a respected member of the party. He's being portrayed by some as a liberal. It harks back to his time as a former member of parliament when he was in charge of education reform. He's a qualified doctor, also a professor at Cairo University's medical school. And on Friday, he told a member of the Al Jazeera team in Cairo that he believes anti-Mubarak demonstrators had been given enough and they should now end their protests. He said Mubarak could not step down as the country's president as it would violate the constitution. Let's speak to another one of our correspondents now. He joins us on the line from Cairo. This argument that is being made by some members of the government now, Hossam Badrawi, as we just mentioned, that the president cannot step down for legislative reasons, does it hold any water? I mean, isn't there much in the Constitution that would allow for a very smooth transition of power in accordance with the Constitution?
Well, indeed, you're absolutely right. There is, within the Egyptian constitution, the ability to transition power. The problem, though, as protesters and opposition figures see it, is that in this case, the transition of power would be moving to people very close to the regime. And it's important to emphasize that according to the Egyptian constitution, should there be a vacancy in the presidency, the official person who assumes the presidency, unless delegated by the president, would go to the Speaker of the Parliament. In this case, it would be Safwat al-Sharif, who has just recently, who had recently now just stepped down from the ruling National Democratic Party Executive Committee, and therefore it would be seen actually as a continuation of the ruling National Democratic Party. Now, if indeed it was to be delegated by President Hosni Mubarak to the Vice President Omar Suleiman, many would still see it in that same light, which is just more of the same. The crisis that you have here as a result of the Egyptian constitution is that the constitution over the years has been amended to solidify and consolidate the ruling National Democratic Party's grip on power through various mechanisms. So, for example, nominating a presidential candidate would only be through the power of the parliament. Well, in the parliament, the current parliament, more than 90% of that parliament is dominated by the National Democratic Party, essentially making them the only party capable of nominating any candidate for the top office. So that is why many are saying to you that there is no crisis if the president not only steps down, but delegates the authority to the vice president so that a transitional period in which a new constitution can be written. If they simply allow the constitution to stay as it is for the next 6 to 7 months, what you really could see is that new players replace the old players, but nothing in the system changes. And that would be the big fear for the protesters who have gained so much and the opposition, is that change would look cosmetic and not substantial.
Is the decision then to remove Safwat Sharif from his position within the NDP another maneuver by the government to undermine the possibility of his being given the authorities from the president according to the constitution, a way to undermine his chances to take over and boost those of Omar Suleiman?
Well, you know, it's important to emphasize he's only being replaced in the capacity of the National Democratic Party, though him and Ahmed Fathi Surur, who is the Speaker of the Parliament, or the People's Assembly rather, would certainly still enjoy their official positions because the Parliament in all of this has not been dissolved. It has been one of the demands of the people or the protesters and the opposition that if indeed this Parliament sticks, then there is absolutely no way the authority can be delegated to the Speaker of the People's Assembly, because that is an individual closely aligned to President Mubarak and the ruling National Democratic Party. The Executive Policy Committee, in which Gamal Mubarak used to sit, as well as all these other figures that we've been talking about, that now has been not dissolved, but they have resigned, now replaced by other key figures, more moderates, perhaps even more reformers, to try to reinvent the party already. But by no means would it satisfy the people that this party organ has just simply had a shuffle, or at least a reinvention with new personalities. And that is the concern that protesters and opposition have. They cannot afford, in their eyes, that the gains achieved be lost with some cosmetic changes.
I'm not sure just how far you are from Tahrir Square. We're still looking at those live pictures of demonstrators who are still camped outside. It appears to be quite calm at the moment. No chance, but still the demands clearly the same. Does the army remain deployed in large numbers in and around Tahrir Square? Do we know which units of the army are there? Are there units from the presidential guards, which presumably are the closest to the president?
No, in fact, we have not seen representatives or units from the Presidential Guard for some time now. They were on the streets in the early days, but since then, I personally have not seen any deployed in and around the Liberation Square. We were told throughout the course of the past several days that various units of the military had been deployed, essentially different levels. There are obviously very elite forces within the Egyptian military and very specific divisions with different capabilities. Well, what we understand this to be is among the most basic levels of the Egyptian military. Certainly not the most elite forces, perhaps not the most technically capable, but at least those that have been assigned to guard or at least protect the streets. It's been one of the criticisms of the military is that it's not really a policing force. It's not a force known to be able to perform peacekeeping type operations in a city as large as Cairo. And that's why when clashes happened on Wednesday and Thursday between pro-Mubarak supporters and anti-Mubarak supporters, the government really, or the military rather, just simply stood by and was rendered ineffective in being able to stop it. Today, though, and in the past 24 hours, they have played a slightly different role, as you can see from those images on your screen. They have been involved now in searching and screening people. They have a slightly more pedestrian presence in terms of where they are on the streets on foot. And I think that is why the military's posture has slightly changed. They're still very much a power broker in this, if not in the political sense, still very much in preserving the security and stability on the streets.
Thanks very much for that update from Cairo. Liberation Square, Tahrir Square, the chants going on again, demonstrators staying put for the 12th day. The demonstrations having begun on the 25th of January. Now we hear talk of dialogue and negotiations going on between the government and opposition groups. If Omar Suleiman, the newly appointed vice president, is to meet with opposition leaders, and we believe he has begun some of these meetings, who can we expect him to be talking to? Mohammed al-Baradi has set up a coalition of political forces and movements known as the National Association for Change. But critics say he came to the protest movement too late. They criticize him for having spent too much time abroad. Al-Baradi has the backing, though, of the banned Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist group that is Egypt's most organized opposition group. Then there's also Ayman Noor. He's been heavily involved in the pro-democracy protests. He heads the El-Ghad party. El-Ghad meaning tomorrow in English. It is one of Egypt's main opposition groups. Meanwhile, Kifaya, which means change, is an intellectual grouping led by George Ishaq. Its members want a liberal and democratic Egypt. And there's the April 6th youth movement. They've been organizing the pro-democracy protest using social media websites like Twitter and Facebook. Abdurrahman Yusuf is a youth activist. He met with Prime Minister Ahmed Shafiq late on Friday. Just a short time ago, we asked him what was discussed in that meeting.
We conveyed to him a message relating to the terms for starting negotiations. Two conditions. One is President Mubarak to step down, whether materially or politically, by way of delegating his powers and authorities to his vice president, as per Article 139 of the Egyptian Constitution. The second condition was relating to the investigations for incidents that took place, and also to acknowledge and admit the revolution by way of two steps. First is to release all the detainees and those arrested since the 25th of January. Second, to identify and arrest and penalize all who assaulted